For years, we thought we understood the Fiend. The mask, the laughter, the violence. But what if everything we saw was only the surface? Tonight, we uncover the hidden secrets of the Fiend, the clues WWE never explained, the messages buried in plain sight, and the terrifying truth that only became clear after he was gone. This is the story they never told you. When Bray Wyatt introduced the Fiend, fans believed it was just another alter ego. They were wrong. From the very first appearance, the Fiend wasn't a character. He was a warning. Look closely at the mask. The exaggerated smile. The lifeless eyes. That wasn't horror design. It was trauma. Bray once said the Fiend was what happens when a man keeps forgiving the world for hurting him, until he can't anymore. The smile wasn't happiness. It was pain pretending to be joy. And that was the first secret. The Firefly Funhouse wasn't childish insanity. It was a crime scene. Every puppet represented a version of Bray Wyatt that had been destroyed. Huskus the pig wasn't laziness. It was shame. Mercy the buzzard wasn't aggression. It was regret. Ramblin' Rabbit wasn't innocence. It was hope, constantly being murdered and brought back to suffer again. And Abby the witch. Abby was control, the voice telling Bray what to become, and when to snap. Every episode of the Firefly Funhouse was a therapy session broadcast to millions, except the therapist was the trauma itself. Secret number 2. The Fiend was never the monster. The world was. The Fiend didn't attack randomly. He targeted people connected to Bray's past. Finn Balor, Seth Rollins, John Cena, Randy Orton, each one represented a betrayal, a loss, or a moment where Bray was abandoned. Especially John Cena. At WrestleMania, the Firefly Funhouse match wasn't surreal nonsense. It was a confession. Cena wasn't fighting Bray, he was fighting guilt. The Fiend didn't beat John Cena physically. He erased him psychologically, because the Fiend's power was never strength. It was memory, and memory is merciless. Then came the lantern, the most disturbing detail fans overlooked. The lantern wasn't a prop. It was Bray's head, a visual reminder that the Fiend had killed the man to survive. Bray once hinted that the Fiend wears what's left, meaning Bray wasn't controlling the Fiend. The Fiend was protecting what remained of Bray. That brings us to the most chilling secret. The Fiend was decaying. Every time he appeared, he looked more damaged, more burned, more broken, more twisted. That wasn't creative direction. That was symbolism. The Fiend fed on pain, but pain has a cost. And eventually, it consumes the host. When the Fiend was set on fire, fans thought it was shock value. It wasn't. Fire has always represented rebirth in Bray's mythology. But this time, there was no rebirth. Only ash. After that moment, the Fiend was never the same. Because the final secret is this. The Fiend was never meant to live forever. He was a final defense mechanism. A last line of survival. And once Bray no longer needed to fight the world, the Fiend had nothing left to protect. That's why his return wasn't violent. It was quiet, vulnerable, human, because for the first time, Bray was trying to live without the monster. And that may be the most heartbreaking truth of all. The Fiend didn't die. He completed his purpose. He carried the pain so Bray didn't have to. And when Bray left us, the Fiend went with him. Not as a villain, not as a demon, but as a guardian, a reminder, a warning, and a legend WWE will never be able to recreate. Because the Fiend wasn't just a character. He was a confession, and some secrets are too heavy to survive. The story doesn't end there. Because after the Fiend disappeared, the signals didn't stop, they just became quieter, hidden in glitches, in camera cuts, in symbols that only made sense once it was too late. Secret after secret, buried so deep that most fans never noticed. Let's go deeper. After the Fiend's last appearances, WWE programming began showing subtle interruptions. Flickers, static, brief distortions in audio, commentary mics cutting for half a second. Those weren't production errors. They were intentional. Bray believed horror wasn't loud. It was patient. The glitches symbolized a mind trying to stay stable while something inside kept pushing back. Not to escape, but to be acknowledged. The Fiend was gone, but the damage remained. Then there were the numbers. Every Firefly Funhouse episode had hidden timestamps. 4:13, 5:28, 9:19. Fans later realized those numbers matched moments of betrayal in Bray's career. Losses, releases, broken pushes, promises that never came true. It was a countdown, not to a return, but to acceptance. And then, Uncle Howdy. Most people thought Uncle Howdy was the next evolution of the Fiend. That's the mistake. Uncle Howdy wasn't rage. He was grief. The mask wasn't threatening, it was hollow. The voice wasn't aggressive, it was tired. Uncle Howdy wasn't trying to hurt anyone. He was asking a question. Who are you, without the pain? That's why Uncle Howdy never attacked like the Fiend. He observed, he waited, he pointed, because by then, Bray wasn't fighting the world anymore. He was fighting himself, and that leads to the most haunting detail of all. Bray once said the scariest part of horror isn't the monster in the dark. It's the moment the monster realizes it's no longer needed. The Fiend was born to absorb trauma. But once Bray began healing, the Fiend became obsolete. That's why the mask cracked. Why the entrance slowed. Why the movements became heavier. The Fiend was fading, not because he was defeated, but because Bray was changing. And here's the secret no one talks about. The Fiend never wanted control. He wanted rest. That's why his last imagery wasn't fire or violence. It was light, lanterns, doors, pathways, symbols of leaving. When Bray returned, speaking openly, vulnerably, honestly, that wasn't weakness, that was victory, because the strongest thing Bray Wyatt ever did was survive without the monster. And when Bray passed, fans didn't just mourn a wrestler. They mourned a storyteller who turned pain into art. The Fiend wasn't meant to scare us forever. He was meant to remind us that even monsters are born from hurt, that even darkness has a reason, and that sometimes, the most terrifying secret of all, is that the monster was protecting us the entire time. The screen fades to black. A single lantern flickers, and a message remains. Let me in, not as a threat, but as a goodbye. But even that goodbye wasn't the end, because long after the lantern went dark, the Fiend kept speaking, not through appearances, but through absence. Here's the detail almost nobody noticed. After Bray's final run, WWE stopped doing one thing they had relied on for decades. They stopped explaining. No recap packages, no clean conclusions, no definitive ending. That wasn't accidental. Bray believed the worst horror isn't knowing what happened. It's never knowing why. And that was the final layer of the Fiend. He wasn't designed to be remembered clearly. He was designed to linger. That's why fans still argue about what the Fiend really was. A demon, a split personality, a supernatural force. The truth is more unsettling. The Fiend was a mirror. Everyone who watched him saw something different, because he reflected whatever pain you brought with you. Some saw fear, some saw anger, some saw healing. That's why he worked, and why he can never be replicated. There's another secret hidden in his entrances. Listen closely to the soundscape. The breathing, the distorted children's laughter, the slowed down theme. Those weren't meant to hype you up. They were meant to make you uncomfortable with silence. Bray understood something most performers never did. Silence is louder than screams. That's why the Fiend often stood still. Head tilted, eyes locked, not rushing. Predators don't hurry, but neither do protectors. And that contradiction was intentional. One of the most haunting clues came from Bray himself, in an interview few fans revisited. He said, "Characters don't die, they rest." That line changes everything, because the Fiend didn't vanish due to creative decisions. He rested because his story had reached its truth. And here's the part that hits hardest. The Fiend was never meant to win every match. He was meant to lose at the right moment. Every loss stripped away illusion. Every defeat exposed vulnerability. Because Bray didn't believe in invincible monsters. He believed in endurance, the ability to keep going even when the magic fades. And that's why his final message to fans wasn't rage. It wasn't revenge. It was gratitude. Thank you for letting me in. That line wasn't about access. It was about trust. He let us see the monster. Because he trusted us with the man. And now, when the lights flicker in an arena, when static interrupts a promo, when a character pauses just a second too long in silence, fans still feel it. That chill, that instinctive thought, was that him? Asterisk. That's the last secret. The Fiend doesn't need to return. Because he already won. He changed how wrestling tells horror. How trauma is portrayed. How pain can be transformed into myth. The Fiend wasn't a chapter. He was a scar. And scars don't disappear. They remind you that you survived. Fade to black. No music. No commentary. Just one final whisper, barely audible. See you down the road. And somewhere, a lantern flickers. Not to scare you, but to remind you, some stories never truly end. They just wait.